2019 has seen the highest number ever of interesting and capable smartphones, and so making a video about my favorites has been the toughest one I think I've ever had to make. So starting with 8 runners-up, devices that I think are really good but didn't quite make the top 20. Pixel 4. I'm a big fan of the design, and in some specific cases the camera is unbelievably good, but there's just too much missing. No ultra-wide camera, very mediocre battery, and a bizarre lack of storage. The Nokia 9 is a lot of fun to use. It's got this penta camera setup, and it takes fantastic raw images which can be tweaked afterwards. I'm also a fan of the design. Sadly, the phone uses an outdated chip, and it shows. Plus, there are 5 cameras here, but still no ultrawide and no telephoto. Now, before I started using this phone, the ZTE Axon 10 Pro, I specifically said, I think it's got really solid hardware, but I'm not sure it's going to do enough to differentiate itself, and having used it, that's about right. It's solid in almost every regard, but just gets buried under the absolute hurricane of equally affordable phones that do more. Galaxy Fold, and you've probably heard a lot of bad things about it, but there's also a lot of good when things work, when you play to the strengths of the phone, like when you're playing a game in full screen, or multitasking 3 applications at once. It flies ahead of what is possible with a normal form factor. It's just, at this stage, it's not a phone I can recommend to anyone but the most adventurous user. It is expensive, it is incredibly bulky, there's a crease running down the middle, but more importantly, I don't think either display is quite right for most things. The front feels too small for media consumption, and the large one has an aspect ratio that's not very well catered for on Android. The Sony Xperia 1. It took me a long time to decide where to place this thing, because I kinda like it. I love the way it fits in the hand, and the super tall display is something I got used to quite quickly, and really like for feed-based applications like Instagram. That said, the camera system is just not as reliable as Samsung or Apple's, and the battery life is just weak. I really like the LG G8X ThinQ. It comes bundled with this secondary display, and it kind of feels like a less stylish alternative to the Galaxy Fold, but one that is far more affordable. It has the same productivity perks and is nearly as powerful, but the cameras are just a bit underwhelming. And of course, if you're going to use this accessory, it can be a little unwieldy. Xiaomi Mi Note 10. And to be clear, I was super impressed with this phone. It's priced reasonably and has got one of the best cameras on a phone ever. It's a little bit niche. It pairs this magnificent camera with a mid-range chip and an average speaker, resulting in a device that's almost perfectly suited for camera enthusiasts, but you can do better if you're more into gaming, video, or music. And finally, the last runner-up is the Oppo Reno 2. It feels great for a mid-range phone, but you can get more power for the money. And so, whilst the design and the camera, they are really solid, in my personal priority list, performance comes first. The company did also release the Reno Ace, which looks amazing, but as of filming this video, it's looking like China only. Okay, top 20. And I've decided the best way of doing this is to categorize, because whilst there isn't going to be one phone that's the best for everybody, if you decide what category of phone you're looking for, then I can say which ones win. So we've got best phones for gaming, best value phones, and then finally, best all-rounder top-tier flagships. If you're buying a phone with gaming in mind, then there are 3 phones that I think excel. Firstly, the Xiaomi Black Shark 2 Pro. Supremely powerful, designed like something out of a sci-fi film, and not as expensive as you might think, at just over £500 or $650. We've got the ROG Phone 2, and there's one word you could use to describe this thing: stacked. It's got the fastest hardware, quite possibly the largest battery on a mainstream phone, and an insane 120Hz fluid display. It's geared for gaming, and so ultimately if that's important to you, you can't do much better than this, but if it's not important to you, you'll feel the compromise in the camera department. And the phone is also massive, to the point where you could see some people finding it uncomfortable. And that leads us to the Red Magic 3S, which I think is the best value gaming phone right now. Spec-wise, it's not quite as high-reaching as the ROG Phone 2, but it keeps the things that matter. It doesn't have the ludicrous 120Hz refresh rate of that phone, but still goes above and beyond the norm with 90. It doesn't have the gargantuan 6000 mAh battery either, but it has a pretty massive 5000 mAh cell. And you're getting all of this for around half the price in the UK and the US. I realize in some regions the ROG Phone is cheaper, so it depends on where you live. Now for the value category. And mind you, I'm not talking cheap phones. I'm talking phones that I think pack the best features into a fair price point. And so first up, Google's Pixel 3a, which to me makes a whole lot more sense than the Pixel 4. For most people. It's got similar clean Google software, a similar Google camera. It's kind of like the Pixel 4, slightly less good at everything, but a lot cheaper and with a better battery life. The XL model in particular has incredible endurance, 8 hours plus of screen on time. So also for around $400 US, my personal pick would be the Redmi K20 Pro, a phone that's good enough that you don't feel like you've just saved a few $100s. It is just as fast as its more expensive counterparts, with even some design flair of its own. For an extra $50 US, you can bag yourself a Realme X2 Pro, which is even better. It dials performance up from just as good as a lot of flagships to actually better. It's using a brand new 64 megapixel camera sensor, which I'm generally quite happy with. It's one of the fastest charging phones out there. We're talking just over 30 minutes for a full charge, and it even has a fluid 90Hz AMOLED panel. I did also test the standard Realme X2, which is cheaper but weaker, and the conclusion is that if you're going to buy one of them, the Pro is the one to go for. If you add another $50 onto that, you get the Asus Zenfone 6. Having not really paid too much attention to Zenfone devices before this, the 6 was a massive shift, and it kind of brought it into the limelight. Better, cleaner software, a huge 5000 mAh battery, and a pretty good camera that can flip around and be used on the front too. If I had to pick faults, I would say the quality of the LCD panel isn't the best. The other option at this price is the dual-screened Nubia Z20, and whilst a dual screen is pretty low on my list of priorities for a phone, it doesn't come at the cost of much. The phone is really powerful, battery life is good, and the dual displays do mean a couple of genuinely useful tricks. Or the OnePlus 7T at $599, but for a lot of people, that extra price premium isn't justified versus Realme and Redmi. Very similar specs. I would say though, with OnePlus, you do get a software advantage. It runs Oxygen OS, which feels cleaner and lighter than its competitors, and you're also likely to get updates more promptly and for longer than some of these other phones. I'm also going to slide the iPhone 11 into this list of strong, affordable phones, and I get it, it's not a cheap device. And considering its external hardware, a not so high-end display, thick black bezels all around it, it might actually start looking like a really expensive phone. If we spec for spec compared it against any of the Android phones I've just showed you, it's not going to come out too well, but Apple have built a phone that just works. It has one of the best camera systems of any phone, in any budget, including an ultra-wide camera that's just as good with video as it is with photos. The build quality, the audio quality, they're fantastic too, but it ultimately comes down to software. The iPhone 11 is currently the most affordable way to experience all the latest iOS features as they were intended. And put simply, if you're currently on an iPhone and you're happy, this is an easy recommendation. If you're currently on an Android phone and you're happy, I'd recommend Redmi, Realme, or OnePlus. Now for the big guns, the all-rounders, the flagships, the phones that try to do everything, in no particular order. So starting with Samsung, in their entire lineup, I think there are 3 devices that have earned a place in this list. The first one being the Galaxy S10 Plus. I can safely say that this has one of the best smartphone displays on the market. If you haven't actually seen one in person, I'd recommend you go and try it. Samsung's new One UI software is much better than the Samsung Experience software it replaced, and the camera started off good, but has been consistently getting better with updates. So much so that I would say it's kept track with all the phones that have released after it. Also, Samsung recently announced the second version of their software skin, and it looks great, but they've called it One UI 2. I would say this, battery life on the S10 Plus is pretty good, but is actually the main reason why I don't particularly recommend the standard Galaxy S10. This phone's battery doesn't seem to hold up that well over time. You've also got the S10 5G, which is a lot more expensive, but it's a better phone all round. You've got a larger display, a beefier battery, faster charging, and more. Plus, of course, 5G. And then the Note 10 Plus, which in most regards is pretty similar to the S10 5G, with the benefit of the S Pen and all the cool stuff that enables, but the drawback of no headphone jack and a slightly smaller battery. Also very deserving of a spot on this list is the OnePlus 7T Pro. When this company started, they were in a league of their own in terms of offering the absolute best hardware at a much lower price. But recently this whole category of cut price flagships has become congested. OnePlus, they're no longer one of the cheapest phones to have the best hardware, but they're becoming one of the better ones. You've got really light, fast, up-to-date software, plus a lot of love has gone into this display. It's dazzling, and as is becoming a bit of a trend this year, has a fluid 90Hz refresh rate. Besides, even though far from the cheapest now, the OnePlus 7T Pro is still cheaper than a lot of its counterparts. You might remember the Vivo Nex 3, that waterfall display phone. I think it's amazing, with one caveat. You've got to be one of those people that really likes curved displays. If you do fall into that group, then this curve is so dramatic, you'll find yourself letting out a little sigh of admiration every time you pull it out your pocket. Plus, it's got a great 64 megapixel camera, a really sizable 4500 mAh battery, and a price tag that's still a couple of $100s less than Samsung or Apple's finest. The iPhone 11 Pro Max is missing a couple of things I would have liked to see on a Pro phone, like a USB-C port for better compatibility and a 120Hz or even a 90Hz fluid display, but it is refreshingly gimmick-free. Everything that is here has a very clear purpose and works really well. Compared to the standard iPhone 11, the main differences are the addition of a telephoto zoom camera, fairly minor, a matte finish, pretty minor too, but also a better display, major. Plus, compared to iPhones of the past, battery life has gone through the roof. It's gone from slightly below average to literally record-breaking. And because of this, 2019 is the first year where I can also confidently recommend the smaller sized iPhone. The endurance is finally good enough that I could see this lasting still a full day, even 2 years down the line. Then we've got Huawei. I loved the P30 Pro when it came out. It's got this crazy hybrid 50 times zoom, so powerful you can literally spy on what's happening down your street, and at nighttime the camera comes into its own. Even 8 months later, there are very few phones that can come close to the nighttime images this captures. The only thing I'd say here is that at the point of filming this video, the US ban on Huawei is still in place, meaning that their future with Google is a little uncertain. So my advice is, if you decide after watching this video that a Huawei phone is what you want, then just wait. I would not buy another phone for a month or so, because there's a good chance we'll see some sort of statement or just clarification on the situation. It's actually looking likely right now that Huawei will be allowed to work with Google again, which would make the P30 Pro a really excellent choice, but in my opinion, not quite as good as the Mate 30 Pro. This is, ironically, considering the US ban, my favorite phone all year in terms of hardware, camera, battery. It's the phone I would be using had there not been any complications. For starters, I love the way it looks. I thought it looked pretty good in the renders, but it's better in person. The asymmetrical design on the front is a little less to my liking, but the Mate 30 Pro has everything. Top of the line camera, almost as capable in the night as it is during the day. It's got the new Kirin 990 chipset, and when you combine its aggressive battery management with a large 4500 mAh cell, this is an easy 2 days of use. Thanks a lot for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.